I'll deliver a baby, and the next day I'll do the postpartum, and mom's like, oh, Teresa started. I'm like, Teresa? She's got a meal train going for us. So that's just like, I'm like, oh, you're in good hands. Teresa's got you. Like the size of a dinner plate is what we describe it as, and that detaches from your uterus, and that's where all that blood flow, that the exchange of blood, nutrients and oxygen, not blood, between mom and baby happened. So when that sheds, it leaves that big gaping wound there, about the size of a dinner plate, and so that's going to continue to bleed until your uterus involutes and all those capillaries shut down and stop bleeding, and that takes time.
Well, hello and welcome back to Elevate Ordinary. I'm your host, JonMarc Grodi.
And I'm Teresa Grodi.
And we're back with another extraordinary conversation about the ordinary pursuit of truth, goodness, and beauty, joined today by our good friend Lisa Baldwin.
Hi.
And we'll introduce her in a moment. Today we're going to be talking about, lots of stuff connected to babies and pregnancy, but particularly the postpartum period after the baby, which we're getting ready for pretty soon here. But I want to remind you before we get into that, as always, that if you like this show, what we're doing here, please check out elevateordinary.com for archives of the show and information about how you can support it. And also download the Awaken app, which is the best way to get access to this show and other shows on Awaken at theawakenapp.io. So Teresa, tell me, what are we doing here today?
I'm so excited to have this episode. This is what I've been wanting to do for pretty much since we started, an Elevate postpartum episode. And when I did this, I dreamed that Lisa would be joining us. So Lisa is technically now my midwife, but we met before. And so I just want to give a disclaimer, like none of this is medical advice. Lisa is not giving you medical advice to supplant your OB. Neither am I. And so just take this as no, he's not. So just take this as a friendly coffee chat.
Exactly.
So Lisa Baldwin, we first met at a homeschooling co-op. We were talking a little bit before we started this. And I remember seeing you and your husband and being like, oh, she's pregnant too. And like, look at this young couple. I'm going to meet them and we'll have some friends. No. And then we went over there, we were chatting and talking. And I was like, oh, they're so cool. Not that you were cool. But then you guys went to give a talk and you were like, and this is baby 14. And I'm like looking at your face and I'm like, how does this woman have 14 children? So we went on to share an almost identical pregnancy afterwards, except for you had twins.
Right.
I had just had one. So Lisa is now a midwife and a wonderful Catholic. And can you tell us a little bit about just yourself, something you're excited about now?
I'm excited
a project
about
that you're working on, birthing babies.
Well, like Teresa said, I'm a mom of 16 kids. We homeschool those kiddos. I have 2 grandbabies.
Awesome.
Yay.
And I'm a midwife. I began an apprenticeship when I was pregnant with my 14th, when Teresa and I met.
Oh, really? I didn't realize that.
That's when I started my apprenticeship. And I finished that up in November of 2020. So, yeah.
Wonderful.
Were you guys from this area, Lisa?
We're from a little further south, near the Defiance area, southwest,
Okay.
from the Defiance area. We moved here when my husband went to college, right out of high school.
Awesome.
That's how you have 16 kids. You get married when you're 19 years old.
That's right. And your last was twins, so you didn't have any other twin pregnancies,
No
did you?
other twins.
My goodness.
Yeah.
Way to go.
That's awesome.
I don't think I've got enough fertility years left in my life to get to.
I thought that a lot along the way too.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about the beauty of the postpartum period. We put out there on social media questions that women had wanted us to answer about doing postpartum as a couple, and just the postpartum period in general, like how to make it a peaceful and recuperative time. And we got a deluge of questions. Like, I've never seen our social media get so many hits, honestly. So in going over the questions and kind of reflecting on them, this episode is meant to be an elevation of the postpartum period, like how we can ask what the body expects, theology of the body, what the body expects, what it's created in an order. But this isn't going to be like a normalizing anything and everything that could possibly happen in the postpartum period, or like a deluge of information, or you should do this with your baby, you should do this with your body. Like, I will share the things that I do to kind of to take care of myself and to make sure that we are eventually getting towards the point where I can have a decent amount of days, maybe like 40 days, at least 2 weeks, but then like maybe 40 days where I just don't do anything. I don't have expectations for myself, especially physical expectations. So we will get into some of the practical things. But I did just want to say that like we're going to keep it focused on the ideal, right? Elevation.
When we say that, we like elevate postpartum, or whatever topic that we're on in a particular time. We were talking about this beforehand, that, we use virtue as kind of the lens on this show. And we talk a lot about prudence, because prudence always has us straddle the ideal, the reality we're trying to apply ourselves to, with the reality of where we are and what's actually happening to us. And you have to have both of those, because you can have people err in either direction. They kind of get focused on some ideal of what the way they expect things to turn out and lose the practical, or they can kind of despair in the practical and not be moving forward. And so virtue is always about taking what God is sending to you, allowing to happen to you, and that's the nature of your body, the nature of the postpartum period, the nature of just the family life, what you're experiencing. But then it's seeing that as an opportunity. So what's God speaking to us through this time? What's the reality that we may or may not have embraced or taken seriously here? How can we really embrace it and receive it? And that's true for, the woman experiencing it, but also the people around her. They need to grapple with this reality to try to make it, to try to be available to what God's doing in that situation.
Yeah, and it's funny because I actually see my life and our marriage in terms of like baby births and then postpartum periods of growth. So like every postpartum period I've had, even the really, really bad ones, have led me to like a further growth in a certain area, or like a different goal in a different direction, or really a deepening of intimacy between the two of us. Right. Like when I like look at our healing, even like our sexual healing and like our sexual relationship, a lot of times it's based on like which baby we've just had. So it is like, it's kind of how I keep my mental calendar of my marriage and my life. Sure. And Lisa's nodding over here. Yeah. So yeah, I kind of just wanted to go through some of my postpartum periods, and some of your postpartum periods. And, I'll kind of rapid fire go through my just five. Just so you guys have an idea of where I am. And this is like, as I was going through the questions, this is like a really touchy subject, as is parenting, as is, most of these things. My pregnant brain is going to do this. So.
Were you going to go through some of yours first, or?
I don't remember if I remember what I was going to say there, but yeah, I'll go through some of my periods or my babies. So my first baby was one of those textbook perfect induction C-sections, where they're like, the baby's too big, we're going to induce you. So then they induce you, and then they're like, this is your last chance to have some kind of medication. Would you like some medication? And then you're like, yeah, give me the stuff that's not the epidural, because I really want to do it natural, and then like the medication doesn't do as much as you want. And then they're like, okay, this is your last chance for an epidural. You're really dilated. This is your last chance, And then it's like, like it just kind of progresses into this, like you're pushing and pushing and pushing and the baby's not coming out. And the doctor says you can keep pushing or I'll give you a C-section. You're like, give me the C-section. And so we had a C-section, which I actually kind of think, like now thinking about the postpartum period, that was a blessing for me being type A, because I couldn't move. I couldn't do anything. Like I was on morphine for several days afterwards, and then I come home and it's the worst pain I've ever experienced. So all I wanted to do is sit in a chair, So it was actually kind of leisurely. I see now that I did develop some postpartum symptoms. Like I was like the postpartum symptom where you like envision violent things occurring. Like I just thought
Postpartum depression symptom.
Yeah, I mean they call it different things now. Like people are like, it's postpartum anxiety, it's postpartum depression, it's postpartum whatever.
There's a big spectrum.
Yeah, but in my mind, like I feel like it all comes from the same place of almost like processing things too fast. Like whether it be physiologically processing things too fast, or if you're just like dwelling on this horrible experience that just occurred to you because it didn't go the way you wanted it to do, or people are coming into your life and you don't want like there's a lot of stuff that happens in that time. And I think that it all kind of affects the way our body ends up manifesting its overall health or whether it can heal or whatnot.
Right. So. And when you talk about the induction, which definitely have their place in the C-section, that definitely has their place, that does interrupt that cascade of hormones that happen. And then that postpartum period will play out differently because of that cascade of hormones has been interrupted and not allowed to unfold the way it would in a typical situation.
Yeah. And that's like, I think that's one of my ultimate reasons as to why I want to protect my postpartum period is that recognizing, like kind of like when you study NFP and you realize like, oh, there's not just my hormones, there's like pheromones and interactions between other people and interactions between my environment as to whether or not my hormones are going to cue. It's similar with the baby where even just learning about like delaying cord clamping or like not interrupting a mother who would, during labor or whatever can interrupt like the flow of hormones. And even though like the flow of hormones with the baby and the flow of hormones that allow the placenta to not violently detach from the body, like all these things that kind of occur because your body is ordered and it expects something. So yeah. I mean, I think, so then the second baby, I was like, we're doing this all natural. I wanted to have a VBAC. We're like on the timeline for a VBAC, and it was actually really hard to find a VBAC doctor, even in 2013.
What does VBAC mean for all the
Oh,
dads
sorry.
out there?
Like a vaginal birth after cesarean. So attempting another natural birth after you've had a cesarean. Yeah. Oh, by the way, we're going to talk about all kinds of stuff here. So if you're squeamish, just... You probably,
suck it up and put your big boy pants on. That was only for the dads.
You probably should just listen. Anyway, our producer's like,
Ethan's.
So, and I did. I had a natural delivery, but there was a lot of intervention by the nurses during the pushing, and I ended up like having a horrendous, like horror movie tear, like. You were there, like blood everywhere, like on the walls, and the doctor. I mean, like, and they're like, "She's a VBAC," and they're like, "Everything's normal. This is totally normal. Just keep pushing." Oh my goodness, I know. So they actually gave me the epidural and ended up knocking me out because I was so freaked out by what was occurring after I had the baby. So I did have my natural birth, but then afterwards I went into surgery and was basically on tons of antibiotics for like 6 weeks. And I ended up developing postpartum depression so bad to the point where like I thought I was dying at every turn. Like I even had a tooth removed because I was clenching my jaw so bad that like you couldn't, like I kept going to dentists and they're like, I guess that there's an abscess that we're not seeing, and specialists and things. And eventually they took my tooth out. I learned later from a NAPRO doctor, natural progesterone, natural procreation. I don't know what it stands for.
Something like that.
Yeah. But they're trained by the Pope John VI, Pope Paul VI Institute.
Yeah.
For reproductive technology. That one of his first signs he tells women when they're in the postpartum period is if you have shoulder clenching, jaw clenching, to call because you need a progesterone supplement, or at least that's what he prescribes for it. So I actually wrote a letter to all the dentists, a very nice letter, just saying like, if you have a new mom coming in and she's screaming that her jaw hurts,
great that you did that.
Yeah, and then I gave them like Dr. Chris Stroud, who's another doctor at our areas, contact information. Like, you can talk to this doctor Yeah, that was a horrific. I mean, I was so much postpartum anger, so much fear. Like I was terrified to put the baby down because I thought she would die. Terrified to sleep because I thought she would die. And that really carried on.
Stressful living situation at that point too.
Yeah.
We made a lot
living
of changes
far
after
away
that
from
one.
family. Yeah, and then the third one would have gone better, I think. But we bought a house the day we came home from the hospital, and we weren't actually even looking for a house or planning or anything. And so that became a really stressful.
That's
month,
really typical, and I do tell families that this is the time of your life when those things happen. It seems unfair, but that's when you're changing jobs and buying houses and having babies.
Yeah.
So there's to accept the reality of that, and
Well, it forces you to talk and to be more proactive about, okay, well, like we have to be really working as a team to make sure this postpartum period and the healing that occurs that's supposed to occur.
Right.
Yeah, work on your community. Ask for all the help, to get you moved.
And then when you're talking about changing jobs and moving, a lot of times that's away from community that you're familiar with.
Yeah.
So we're very blessed to have the parish communities that a lot of times we can plug right into.
Yeah. And actually, so after the third baby, I was thinking I was allergic to things all the time because I didn't know what a panic attack felt like. Mm-hmm. So I just thought I was having anaphylaxis all the time. I actually remember being at the YMCA and having them call the emergency squad. And my best friend comes in and she's walking with her kids through the lobby because I was on the floor in the lobby. And she's like, "Hey, where are your kids?" I'm like, "I don't know." And she's like, "I'll find them." So she watched the kids until the rescue squad came and told me basically nothing's wrong with you. But it was really freeing the day that I realized I was thinking about a thing that I thought I was allergic to and started having that anaphylactic reaction. And then once I realized that it was all in my head, I was like, oh my gosh, what a relief. Now I'm going to get blood work and I'll find a counselor and I'll sit on the phone with counseling sessions for, you know what I mean? There was a plan that could happen.
Right.
And then with the next baby, I was like, I am going to take care of myself and really be careful in those first few days or the first weeks or whatever. And we're going to have a meal train set up and we're going to take all the help that we can get. And we started planning the entire pregnancy to prepare for the postpartum period. And it was so peaceful and so beautiful. And I recovered really well. And I had no postpartum depression whatsoever. Similar with my fifth baby born at home, and just really caring for that time. So this is my journey of how I messed up a lot of times, but just kept plugging along, trying to figure out what I did wrong.
Right. Well, experience is the best teacher. Yeah. And unfortunately, in our culture, we don't have a whole lot of discussion about postpartum. So we go into becoming pregnant and having a baby with very little information too, good information, and then postpartum even less. So
just the shake your baby video they make you watch before you leave, which is really helpful actually.
Don't shake your baby.
No, don't. Yeah, don't.
It's the don't shake your baby video.
That's right.
In the hospital. Yeah.
Unless you're doing that happiest baby on the block thing, then you jiggle your baby.
Just
right.
Little jiggle.
Yeah, but I actually remember at my baby shower, there were some great aunts there, some aunts removed or something like that my mom was talking about. And they were talking about all the horrible things that they thought when they had babies. And that was my first introduction to it, where they were like, "Oh, I thought about pouring hot tea on my baby's head because it was crying." And they were all like, "Ah!" I'm like, "Oh my gosh. Oh, the window was open across the room and I thought about throwing my baby out the window." And they're all like, "Ah!" And you're like, so that when you did get frustrated, when I did get frustrated with the baby, I was like, okay, this is normal. These these thoughts aren't right, but at least I just felt like I could put the baby down and call my mom and not be terrified of myself, and just say these women got through this. I just need to think rationally in this situation, but if I didn't have that, I wouldn't have had anything.
I never had that. Nobody ever said anything like that to me. And I probably would have been thought she was crazy.
I definitely
But so when I did inevitably have those thoughts, those kinds of, I remember thinking my third baby that I wanted to put him in the oven because he was like a little butterball. It made perfect sense. And then I scared myself. I thought, oh my goodness, what is wrong with me? I don't want to do that to my baby, but he's like a little butterball. And it was a long time before another mom admitted to me that she had similar thoughts. And I thought, wait a second, this happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or like the thought you put the baby down in a room and you're like, I know a car is going to crash into that room and hit the baby. Or like you're on the stroller and you're like, I know the stroller is going to like fly out of my hands and go in front of a car. And you're envisioning like really violent things. And I didn't know that had anything to do with like postpartum. I just thought it was like your instincts are like kind of crazy. When I went about and I did get blood work, I had like elevated copper and low zinc, which apparently happens in the postpartum period sometimes.
Okay.
And like the symptoms of elevated copper are like OCD and violent thoughts and suicidal thoughts and like all the things that you think of about the postpartum period. And all I had to do, and this is not medical advice, this is what I did, was I took zinc for 2 months.
And that helped.
It just went away.
Well, the interesting thing too, though, is that even if there's not a imbalance or anything like that, that we're organizing all these new thoughts in our head, all these new concerns all of a sudden come up, and we're trying to integrate all of that into the reality of the day to day. And it's a lot and it can get very jumbled. And so that's always been my personal thought on where those things come from. It's just a lot to integrate right then. And when you get overstimulated and you're just like, you can start shutting down, because you're trying to integrate all of the noise and everything that's going on. That happens in the quiet of nursing in the middle of the night, that you just are trying to integrate all of these thoughts. Yeah. And I think that sometimes they come out like that.
There's probably, maybe you have some thoughts on this. Again, so we hear all the things or some of the things that can happen, and it's a difficult period, this postpartum period. There's all sorts of reasons why it's really hard for moms and dads and the people around them to really give that period the care that it should have. I think part of it might just be our mindset about life and the busyness of life and being productive. But do you often see that with people? It's
so I guess
hard
like what is the
moms.
postpartum period first?
Yeah.
Like what is physiologically happening that would cause you to need recovery or space or whatever,
right?
And then
what's your question?
Well,
I'm the worst.
Yeah.
I'm the worst.
Well, I mean, physically, there are a lot of levels to this, but physically your body is healing from whatever kind of birth you had, even if it was the straightforward vaginal delivery, no medication, your body is healing from that. Then your body is also at the same time making milk to feed that baby. So you have this huge hormonal shift from from pregnant to non-pregnant to lactating. And then trying to figure that out if you've never done it before or been around that before. And then lack of sleep because that baby needs to eat every 2 to 3 hours, even during the night.
I think
so you're
nighttime brain is crazy.
Yeah.
Like I really do. I think that there's something physiologically different about nighttime brain. And that you're in like real danger when you're up and thinking in the middle of the night.
The most helpful thing that ever occurred to me in the middle of the night nursing, and I don't remember which baby this was, sorry, but being awake in the middle of the night, and when I wake up, my brain turns on automatically and it's just going. So I'm not one of those people that can fall back asleep after I get up and use the bathroom or let the dog out or check on a kid or whatever. So I'm awake for a while.
Yeah.
And I would just like stew in my own juices sometimes. Like I really want to go back to sleep and look at him. He's sleeping but I would have to sit there and nurse the baby. And so I would try to turn to prayer, very distracted prayer because those thoughts keep coming in. And, but finally I had this realization, this little consolation that during the day when I'm up with my children and I have a new baby, I'm constantly torn on what my priority is. Like this one needs me to save him from the countertop. We need dinner in an hour. This one needs their bottom wiped. And this kid needs to be taken to this practice. But in that middle of the night, that quiet middle of the night and everybody else is sleeping, there is no question of what I'm supposed to be doing. I don't have that conflict of like, nobody needs me except this baby. There's no question that this is my priority right now. That gave me a lot of comfort.
Yeah. Like wholeness of vision or presence. Like, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even if it was fleeting, it did give me comfort.
Yeah. And that's, we did an episode on leisure just recently. And that is like the basis of leisure, which is, I'm not the philosopher.
Well, this openness to reality, right?
Well, just
being
like
present to what's really there.
Yeah, being present when you want to be distracted in many ways. So a lot of times our Sabbath, when we're called to leisure, like is really just like a call to like try to be present to the thing you're supposed to be present in. Try to receive the good gifts that God is giving you and that family gives you.
I'd love to hear more of your journey on all this, Lisa. I mean, how have these experiences been for you, and how did that sort of lead up to now becoming a midwife and all that?
So my first was, I'm not going to go through all of them.
Yeah.
We don't have that kind of time.
Yeah.
But my first was a hospital delivery, typical. I mean, it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't great. It wasn't what I wanted. Even at 19, I knew that I wanted more. So when we became pregnant with our second, I knew that I was seeking out different care, and that's when I chose to have a home birth. But my postpartum period with my first was a lot of, from family. I didn't do it this way, and you turned out fine. And so and so does it this way, and a lot of like really conflicting information. And I ended up going to the Leche League meeting, which is a breastfeeding support group. And I walked in there, and there were women. They had 4 kids. 2 kids, 6, 10. One woman had 10 kids. I believe the leader at the time had 12 kids. And some of the kids were barefoot. It was the middle of the winter. And I mean, there was just like all these kids. I was like, oh, I'm home. I was like this huge sigh of relief. And they talked about their experience, especially with nighttime nursing and that kind of thing, and how they were just really embracing motherhood. And I thought, This is what I want. This is what I need. And I became really good friends with one of the La Leche League leaders. She's a godmother to several of my children. And just having that kind of mentor. She was a little bit older than me and had more children than me. That was like that. So my first 6 weeks with my first was rough. Went to that meeting and just really realized that I have, God has given me what I need to parent this baby, and I have those tools, and they might look different than my mom's and my grandma's, or my mother-in-law, even my friend here. It might look different than that, but I do have it. And so it was quite a journey of discovery of what those tools were and how to use them. Then I became pregnant with my second very shortly after that, and we had a home birth with her, and by that time I kind of had my head on a little straighter about how to take care of myself, and that I had more confidence that I knew how to do that. But it was a stressful time in our lives. Yeah. My husband was in school and he was working full time, and we had one vehicle.
Oh, that was like our second baby.
Yeah. We were in a new place, so it was very, very stressful. And interestingly enough, it sounds kind of counterintuitive, but the more children I've had, the postpartum period has become a little easier because we have more hands to help out. I mean, so like with my twins, postpartum was really, really rough because I was not getting any sleep. You would think being babies 15 and 16, I would be like, oh, this is a piece of cake. I can handle 2 babies. But because they were babies 15 and 16, I had done things a certain way all those years. And all of a sudden that was kind of turned on its head. Yeah, it was a very different experience. So, but we had so much help from our community. Starting when I was about, 32 weeks pregnant, I was on some modified bed rest because we were trying to keep them in until at least 38 weeks. And I didn't want the burden to fall on my children to cook all the meals and clean all the floors and take care of everything. And so our community really stepped up, and we had a meal every 2 to 3 days. Somebody would bring a meal. Awesome. People would randomly drop breakfast off on the front porch, and so that burden was lifted from my children somewhat. And my husband, he was doing a lot, and it was just really nice to have that support. And that continued until they were about 3 months old. I don't think I cooked a meal until they were 3 months old. Yeah. So
praise God.
I know not everybody has that, but that was my experience.
It's interesting because I think even we who are used to more of that because we're trying to seek it out. We're trying to build it. Even for us, when we hear that, there's a part of us, there's a voice that we've absorbed from the culture, which is kind of like, wow, I mean, like people are really having to step it up to take care of you, you know, in the midst of all of this. And again, it shows the goofy priorities of our society,
Yes.
right? Like we who have embraced family life, we see the hassle, the postpartum period, all the stuff around that as sort of a necessary but
kind of grit your teeth and get through
just
it.
get
period.
through it, rather than no. This is like the high point here. This is bringing new life in the world. This is where we pull out all the stops. Husbands, kids, community. We pull out all the stops here because this is new life.
Right.
Like this is what all this stuff is for. This is what society is for. It's about people. And so it takes us some retraining and a lot of, you know, trial and error in our own experiences of like, wow, my priorities are all goofed up because this is what we're working towards. This is where we come together to make this happen and for the good of the baby and to take care of the mother.
Right. But what a wonderful thing we're teaching our children by accepting that kind of support from our community. And then when we're able to, and we're in a position to offer that ourselves. And I know, Teresa, you are fantastic. I mean, I'll deliver a baby and the next day I'll do the postpartum and mom's like, oh, Teresa started. I'm like, you know, Teresa, she's got a meal train going for us. So that's just like, I'm like, oh, you're in good hands. Teresa's got you.
It's such a great ministry, both because it's a great thing for the mom and the family, but also because like we talk a lot about on this show and how, I mean, to give another person this very physical way of doing service. I mean, sometimes our service these days is so sterile and artificial. Like, oh yeah, bring a can of soup and put it in this cardboard box, and we'll go give it to some people that you'll never see or know or care about. Rather than, no, I made this food. Like our family made this food that we put together. We and we're bringing it to somebody. I mean, you give somebody else a great gift to allow them to help you out.
Right.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. And a lot of times, even when I'm making a meal for someone, especially somebody who's just had a new baby, I'm thinking to myself, like, as I'm cooking, like, I really want this to nourish her. Like, so what can I do to like have this be a really nourishing meal? Because I mean, it's super easy to like do a pasta or something like that. And I have done pasta, but then it's just like, there's part of me that's like, oh, but I want to bring her some like broth, like some broth soup, you know, just something that's going to be warm and cozy and, you know, so there's that added level of like, I'm nourishing this person.
Right.
You know, and I remember Frances Russell brought me my first meal when I had David at home. She was there like that evening. And I remember she saw like French fries in a picture I sent her of the baby. And she was like, how did she get French fries? She shouldn't be eating that. She was like mad. But she brought me this like homemade, they're like regenerative farmers, so everything comes off their property, you know. So it was like homemade chicken noodle soup, and it was the most delicious nourishing. I almost cried every time I was eating it because I knew it was really like taking care of my body. And I knew she intended that. And like it's just such a beautiful deepening of a relationship. And a lot of times we find that like women will finally accept meal trains, even if they've like denied them in the past, which is everybody's business. That's what they want to do. But when they'll accept them, they'll actually start to become more active in the community.
Yes.
Because I don't think until we're served in that way, we really realize like what we were missing. And then community becomes just such a much bigger priority. In Steubenville, we had this like multi-generational moms group when we were living there. I had one baby there, Lucy, and everybody just got 14 days or something like that of meals, or like 7 days, something like that. Like they had it set up perfectly so that like somebody would ask you a series of questions that I just actually still copy and paste to every mom that I give them to. And I remember getting that and just feeling like, yeah, free meals. But as they were all coming in, like on stressful days, on days where it was just the thing that I absolutely needed that day was for someone else to like come into my space and bring me food and take care of me. And then just being like, this is invaluable. Right. Like we need this whenever we move somewhere. Like my priority needs to be starting a mom's group so that we have meals for our next baby. And it has kind of turned out like that. Now, like the first baby didn't get meals because we were all 4 of us who started the moms group were all pregnant and due the same month, including Alina De La Torre. We all had girls, all started with C names. all born the same month. But like, after that, you know, the group just really grew and everybody was kind of getting what they needed, you know?
Yeah. I always say if you're going to take a new mom a meal before you go, to ask her, do you want me to drop it off? Or do you want me to visit, you know, and just accept whatever that answer is? Because sometimes it's like, just drop it off. You don't want to come in here. Yeah. And sometimes it's, yes, please sit down and talk with me and hold my baby. And, you know.
Yeah.
Let's keep digging down there. So, I mean, these meals, we've talked a little bit about our experiences, right? And obviously there's a difference between how it is initially and then you learn a lot over time. And so there's maybe a big difference between the postpartums we first experienced and what happens now. But so what do moms need? Like what, if we're now trying to turn and focus a bit more on the ideal, you know, that the mom should be thinking about, that the dads should be setting their sights on, like what do moms really need? What ought they be getting in the postpartum period?
You know, that's very individualized, because some moms would be just really happy to be able to stay in bed for a week, in the bedroom for another week, and then kind of around the bedroom for another week. Some moms, that might drive them crazy. So, you know, we need to be really careful not to say you need to do this, this, and this, because we're so also individual that, you know, one mom might need to walk Target at 1 week postpartum just to be out. I shudder at the thought for myself. But
even as like 100% extrovert, I think I'm not even going to the pediatrician visit.
Right.
Sorry.
Yes. Yeah. I'm the same way, but you know, we have to remember that some moms that might be what they need to help keep their sanity during that time. Definitely nourishing food, you know, definitely somebody to ask them, what do you need? You know, what specifically can I do for you? And to meet that need without any kind of judgment. Well, you shouldn't be doing that. I'm not going to, you know, we can't do that. But I think that question, the answer to that question doesn't lie in the postpartum period. That's like beforehand. Okay, so we spend a lot of time preparing for pregnancy. We spend a lot of time preparing for delivery. We spend very little time preparing for postpartum. So, you know, all of those things that you talked about, that you had questions on social media about when you kind of polled your audience. And it was stuff you didn't want to get into. Those questions, it's good to have resources to find answers to those questions. So if you're concerned that you're going to be dealing with postpartum depression, if your mom was on such and such medication and you think that might be helpful to you or whatever, pregnancy is the time to gather those resources. If you are going to have trouble breastfeeding, that's also the time to gather who's going to help with meals. Childcare, if you need to have a couple of hours in the afternoon for your kids to go out, who can do that? Who can take your kids safely for a couple of hours? The postpartum period, I don't want to say we're not thinking clearly. I'm not trying to say that women are crazy postpartum, but
I'll say that. We are not.
But when you're in the midst of a difficult time, it's often the hardest time to think clearly about it, when you're in the middle of it.
Right. And it's a lot to ask dad too, to try to take that on or answer those questions during that time, because dads are going through sleepless nights as well, concern for different financial concerns, concern for their wives and their children, and work. If I miss this much work, how are we gonna? So they have their own set of concerns, and it's kind of an unfair burden to put on them to come up with the answers in the middle of it. So I think that postpartum is something that we should be talking about in pregnancy.
Like I remember adding gradually to my birth plans, the different names and numbers of people I wanted to call should situations arise. So not just like your priest, if you're going to die and need to be baptized, your baby baptized or something like that, but like adding a pediatric dentist that does lip and tongue ties, because that was something we had an issue with, or adding which lactation consultant I was going to call, or adding a postpartum doula's name, which a postpartum doula is somebody who kind of comes in almost like a mom or a grandma. A lot of times they have like background in nursing and stuff like that. So they come into your house, maybe change your clothes, do some laundry, hold the baby while you shower, and give you advice on nursing and stuff like that. Just like adding those things so that I didn't have to think about those numbers. I didn't have to think about who was going to do it. And I could, even if I needed, just be like, here, you call this person and set something up. Or even checking in with people who during pregnancy say, oh, I'd love to help. Let me know what I can do. like during pregnancy, writing
Write
their
it
name
down.
down and their contact information. So you can just be like, can you call this person or can you text this person, see if they can take the kids or if they can help out in this way or pick up our milk share, which is something we need to get on the schedule. So like thinking we spend a lot of time during the pregnancy thinking about the postpartum period now because it's just so valuable.
Right. I don't think very many people do. It's not a, we talk a lot. I mean, at least we're to the point now where we're talking about birth plans, where that's even a thing. But, we need to keep moving that forward and talk about postpartum plans.
Yeah. That's why I'm hoping that this will help.
Yeah.
Well, both of you talked about how, you mentioned the word normalization earlier. Again, I think it reflects a lot on our culture on how when the culture does talk about some of this more nitty-gritty aspects of family life at all, it's sort of sterilized and careful and clean and tidy. It's just showing kind of like what shows up in the movies, like just the real, but not all of the messiness of it. And the problem is that if you've never experienced that, then again, you don't know, am I crazy for having these thoughts or for feeling like I need help in this area? And like, we need to put those stories out there because it's like, you need to, all this stuff is normal and you should be asking for help. You should be reaching out.
And it's not normal to have multi-generational living anymore or multi-generational sharing. A lot of times people, even like Catholics who are really, really well catechized about sex and have chosen, to follow the church's teaching and use NFP and whatever, like you get into marriage and you're still like, oh, I don't, do other people have abstinence periods this long? Do other people struggle with these things? And there's nothing. And that was supposed to be your multi-generational living. Now we only think about sex with like 20-year-old people who are celebrities or whatever. And there's not we're not thinking about grandma and grandpa's abstinence periods or like how they avoided children, and we're not thinking about our parents because that's gross because we've been told that that's gross. You know what I mean? Like, or like, it's just, we're missing this multi-generational, the passing on of the domestic church, and so, I think there is even though it's like a trigger word for me, the word normalization of something, but it does we do need to share our crazy stories because like that woman in the middle of the night who's going crazy can at least say like somebody else has been here. Right. Shoot.
And we're doing that for each other in the community that you're working so hard to build, and you're doing a beautiful job of it. And we're showing that to our children. My kids will say, if it's been a couple months, we're like, we haven't taken anybody a meal in a while. And I'm so happy when we do that. I'm like, oh yeah, that is what we do. You're right. Yeah. So, we're showing them that we are passing that on to them. And when you offer that help or you give that help to somebody, like you said, then they're more apt to do that themselves. Yeah.
Or even just begin accepting help or just realize that it really is a necessity to have a community to draw on. It's not just something that's like some people's idea of fun, or what extroverts like, or people that don't have family nearby should have somebody else to rely on. I did want to talk a little bit about the gaping, fresh bleeding wound in the uterus during the postpartum time, because it took me 5 babies to realize that the bleeding that was occurring after the baby was not just my uterus shedding its lining like it is every single month. And I don't think many women realize this. I think that they think it's just like an extended period that's occurring. So
that was interesting for me to hear that because that never occurred to me so you have this placenta, and I know if you have your baby in the hospital, you don't often get to see that placenta. If you have a home birth, you do. We will show you that placenta, but it's like this big, that's a big. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
No, I want people to hear what you're saying.
So it's like the size of a dinner plate is what we describe it as, and that detaches from your uterus, and that's where all that blood flow, that the exchange of blood, nutrients and oxygen, not blood, between mom and baby happened. So when that sheds, it leaves that big gaping wound there, about the size of a dinner plate. And so that's going to continue to bleed until your uterus involutes and all those capillaries shut down and stop bleeding. And that takes time.
Yeah.
If you liken it to a skinned knee, we talked about this earlier, when your little one skins their knee in the afternoon and it's got all that fresh blood on it, you clean it up and take care of it. And then they go to bed that night and it stops bleeding, but then they get up in the morning and start using it again. And all of a sudden you've got fresh blood again. It's a very similar thing. So a lot of women will notice that after a couple of days, their bleeding slows way down. They're feeling better. They go put a lot of laundry in and maybe do some dishes or even go down, for a walk around the block. And all of a sudden, oh gosh, I'm bleeding again.
Yeah.
Well, that's what you did. So
I see women all the time on like NFP groups talk about like, I don't understand why I'm bleeding again. My bleeding stopped at 2 weeks and now it started again. Is this a period? Is this, and I mean, like, I can't answer that question for each individual person, but part of me is thinking like, how much have you done?
Right.
Have you been up, like moving, cause like, if you imagine what you're saying like on your leg, if you were taking care of somebody who had this giant gaping wound on their leg and they kept getting up and breaking open the wound, you'd be like, oh my gosh, sit down until that thing does not bleed freshly anymore.
Right.
Like, you'd be really mad at that person. But I think because we're so used to having a period, we're just like, oh, it's just bleeding.
Right.
Like, it's totally normal. And I think like I always assign myself like really arbitrary. Well, they feel arbitrary. They feel so arbitrary when you're in them. And I'm really glad that I think about them ahead of time, because I'm always like, around 2 weeks postpartum, I'm going to start getting like this second wind. I'm going to feel really good. And I'm going to feel like I can do this meal. I can walk down the stairs and put in the laundry. And I even like write myself a note that's like, fight that feeling at 2 weeks, because you are not healed.
Right.
Your bleeding will start again. Just rest. And so I always have to be like, okay, the 2 week window, like this is when this occurs. And even the doctor that I ended up seeing for postpartum depression or progesterone usage was like, yep, usually around 2 weeks, we'll see this like increase in postpartum depression. And a lot of times it's just like women are getting back, your husband goes back to work or has been going back to work, and you're getting back into the quote unquote swing of things, and you're doing it too early.
Right.
You're doing too much too early. And then I also have in my mind, like I set 2 months as an arbitrary. I just picked 2 months at one point. And I was like, I'm not going to care about whether or not I'm using paper plates, whether or not I'm saving the environment, whether or not, like anything is clean. I'm just going to step over mess. I'm going to pretend like clutter is the most calming thing in the world. And I don't care that the kids don't have laundry done, and I don't care that they're wearing the same shirt that they've been wearing for 6 days, or I don't know when they've bathed last. I'm just not going to care. And I'm not going to schedule anything except for maybe the baptism. And it's just like nothing. I'm not going to care. And then like, there's another level of not caring that I have. Like I've got a lot of levels of not caring. Like 3 to 5 months where you're like, this is when another resurgence of quote unquote postpartum depression occurs. And it's likely it's when you're doing too much and your baby is changing and the sleep is changing and you're getting overstimulated, right? You're like,
yes,
doing too much. And the doctor said that's another time that he notices women need progesterone supplementation. It would be during that time. And then I don't care about my body getting back to anything like normal until 10 months postpartum, or like feeling like I can handle my life again until 10 months postpartum. Like up until that point, I'm just like, no, we have a new baby in the house. It doesn't mean I don't do things. It just means I don't care that I don't look the way I did, or I'm not exercising the way I did, or I'm not, like I don't want to downplay exercise because movement's really important, but like the not caring milestones in my brain are there to really protect my sanity.
You're just changing your expectations. It's not so much that you want me to get that for you.
In the middle of talking, I'm so sorry, Lisa. That's okay. I had her pick up my paper while she was saying something.
I don't know how you'd get it at this point.
Because I'm really pregnant right now. If you're just watching this or listening.
I forgot what I was saying now.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. It's not so much not caring. It's a shift in expectations. And it's your expectations are matching the reality that you're living in.
Yeah.
So,
and that's virtue. Trying to match your expectations to reality.
reality.
That's an important piece of this. Because again, you go into a lot of different expectations or hopes or, ways you think it's going to go. But,
I also think, I don't think that social media is helping us with that postpartum expectation. I think that we're seeing, even ads for postpartum stuff, all the stuff for postpartum. It's all shiny and pretty and clean and quiet and calm. And that's not matching most of our realities.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I was reading about a whole bunch of different cultures as postpartum, because when you look into things, like every culture develops their own postpartum period for women, and they all look really, really similar, which is probably because the body is ordered and expects certain things, and people value, in older cultures, people actually valued the family and valued what the woman, brought to the community. Whereas today, like, we all need to be equal. And that also means you have to behave like a man after you've had a baby and just get right back out there or whatever. But like in the Chinese culture, or this person's China's big, but in the Chinese culture, they were saying they don't even allow women, the old way of taking care of women, they don't even allow women to read during their quarantine, whatever their quarantine period is, around 40 days, 6 weeks or whatever. Because the windows are the eye to the soul, and if you read something,
the eyes are the windows.
The eyes of the windows. And so, if you read something that's disturbing, it can disturb like your mental peace during that time. And it's so funny because I just read this like last month, but I remember last baby, I had a traumatic birth, even though it was my home birth and everything was wonderful and turned out okay. There were things I didn't like. And I remember, nighttime brain sitting there like stewing over and like starting to cry, and then being like, no, I'm going to tell myself that you're not going to process this birth until you are physically healthy to do it. You're just going to sit and watch as much Jane Austen as you want and like lay around and be fed and think happy thoughts. You're not going to think bad thoughts. You're not going to worry about processing your mental health right now, or who's in your house doing what, or the sounds you hear from the children. Nope, you're not going to do that. And I was surprised to see that a lot of these indigenous postpartum caring packages, that the community would like take care of the woman in her space of healing, had a lot to do with that, where you would kind of like keep her in a happy, positive, non-world out there bubble,
right?
Which certainly doesn't include social media,
right? So because what are most new moms doing when they're nursing their baby in the middle of the night is we're scrolling our phones and getting all the everything from everywhere. So Do
you have some advice around that, like in terms of what you see from the women that you've worked with?
Regarding social media or the phones?
I guess protecting, because again, there is that sense of like, hopefully women give themselves permission to, to stay physically, to rest, and that, the community supporting them in that. But then we have this phone that allows us to try to escape from where we are and maybe, stress ourselves out in a different
I will
way.
say most of the women that I work with recognize that.
Good.
They're very conscientious of that and recognize that. And, it's difficult as a midwife, and I bring a lot of my own personal experience and whatever to it. I don't want. I got to stay in my lane,
Yeah.
But most of our moms do recognize that.
Yeah, we were talking about that this morning, and just how, even in a small way, we experience that, like when we have a sick day or when we're trying to take a good Sabbath. Like we both, wrestle with this of, okay, so I'm not going to work. I'm not going to physically go do my work. But then the other direction is to just drop my prudence and to like binge on Netflix or whatever. And it's like, no, that's not good rest either. I don't come away from that having really rested and really recovered. I'm just stressed out in a different way. And so it's, it's like trying to guard that period, and that we're not physically doing stuff, but then we're
trying to be productive. You're like in a productive mindset, or you're
not because you get sucked back into that too. Like I need to be productive, so I got to sit here and I got to read a bunch of books. It's like, well, don't get sucked into that end of things too. Like you don't have to be productive. You can kind of rest.
Yeah. What was that thing you said about leisure when we were talking this morning? It was receive this time as a gift from God and from others as true leisure, my Sabbath for presence to myself and to my baby, like entering into contemplative mode and resting in beauty, which was kind of what you're talking about when you're like in the middle of the night. Like, this is what I'm doing. Like, this is I'm just resting in beauty. I'm resting in the fact that this is my only duty. Like, having my body near the baby's is like my only duty right now, taking care of me and my baby, and it's leisure, and it is hard for us to do leisure, to allow ourselves to do leisure, especially as moms, when you're worried about how your household is running and what you'll come back to.
Well, when you think about, you're pregnant now, and we talk about eating well and eating something every couple of hours, because that's what your body needs. So you eat something every couple of hours. And then when the baby's born, that baby nurses every couple of hours. So what are you doing? You're sitting down every couple of hours. So to have that thought that I can get up and be productive, or, do the things that I need to do, but it is okay. It is just as productive to sit down, just like when I sit down to eat every couple of hours, because that's what my body needs, that I'm sitting down with my baby every couple of hours, or even not with your baby. If the baby doesn't need to eat, but you've been up and you've been doing things for an hour and a half, it is okay to sit down. That's not lazy. It's not, that is rest, and that's okay. And we need that.
Yeah. We had our last midwife appointment at my house, because it was like the home visit. And it was like the day that I had hurt my pelvis, and I just had to sit all day on the couch. We have like midwives doing the home visit, and we had a priest coming over for dinner that night, and it was just like, I'm gonna have to sit on this couch all day. So I hope you guys like lists.
But even when you're not hurt, you're not injured, and I'm glad your pelvis seems to be feeling better.
Yes.
But even, there's no extenuating circumstances, nothing, it's still okay to have that. And as moms, especially, we're like, go, go, go. If the kids don't need me for this right now, I'm going to go throw a load of laundry in or whatever. And sometimes we have to do that. Of course, people need to eat and we need clean clothes, but, it is okay to sit down for 10 minutes. I refuse to feel like I'm being lazy because I'm putting my feet up for 10 minutes. Because then I can come back to that job with greater focus, greater presence, and, give it justice and not.
Yeah.
So.
We've talked about, the capital sin of sloth, and people, when they hear that, they just think laziness, right? But traditionally in the history of the church, they've identified, well, no, it means this reluctance to face reality. And that may take the form of laziness in some people's lives, but for most of us, it takes the form of trying to stay too busy, because we feel like that's where we are deriving our sense of worth, our sense of peace. Whereas, sometimes it is an act of obedience to God, to the reality He's sending you, to say, you know what, now it is the time to rest and to give up this productivity, which I can make an idol. It's we all wrestle with that in different ways.
Wow, I've never thought of the postpartum period as a temptation towards sloth, but it really is, because there is this great thing that is expected of you. Your reality is that your body and your baby's body are going to do what they need to do together during this quote unquote fourth trimester.
It's a very holy thing.
And you're learning the baby and the baby's learning you, and they're stateside for the first time. And like, this is your holy job. And the sloth is to run from the bigness of that job into something else that's smaller, like my worth is derived from whether or not my children have clean laundry, which is what you do. You do feel that,
right.
Or whether or not we're still eating nachos off of paper plates and it's been 3 months, since I've had my baby, and it's just like,
when you start seeing that the kids are okay, you've been wearing that shirt for 3 days, but it looks fine and you're okay. And nachos on paper plates again for dinner. We had that over the weekend, but
no one has walked past me and I can't smell anyone. And no one's got a rash from lack of hygiene. Like, we're doing okay. You'll live, kid. Oh my goodness. My normal, not even like a functional medicine doctor, like 80-year-old doctor who's close to retirement, was like, your copper is so high. We need to send you to a heavy metal specialist. I don't think he knew what to do. But like looking that up, it was just like, oh yes,
that's interesting.
Obsessive compulsive and violent thoughts and scary suicidal. I never had suicidal thoughts, but I had a lot of those thoughts. I never had, I'm going to kill my baby or myself, which is what you only think is postpartum depression.
Right.
Or weepy or something like that. I'm plenty weepy during pregnancy, especially with the girls, I've noticed. So yeah, it was helpful to look up those symptoms and just be like, oh my gosh. And then you mentioned other people and they're like, yeah, I thought like I thought the baby was going to like bounce out of the car in front of the train.
Yep. Yeah. I avoided stairs for a long time because I just was like, I
might throw the baby down the stairs. Yeah.
Yes. Not the baby might fall down the stairs.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's
like,
almost like, what would happen if, yes.
It's like the craziest. There's like this S curve in Perrysburg on the Maumee River. And I've driven it my entire life. And when I had postpartum depression with 3, like when I was having panic attacks, I would like drive on it. And it was 100% going to happen that at some point our van was going to drive into that. Like there was just like, it was inevitable. It was going to happen. And I was going to have to somehow save all of my children from like the death trap that a minivan would be falling into the river.
Yeah.
And now when I drive that, I'm like, Teresa, you'd have to be driving 70 miles an hour towards the river.
Yep, I've had those things too. I have, and I
was really scared. For
and
like
I always,
months.
and I've just, I never heard about the copper before. That's very interesting. But it was for me that the conclusion I came to was just trying to integrate everything that was going on. Just trying to like integrate all of my surroundings and all the newness and lack of sleep.
That's why I like those arbitrary things. Like I base them off of me knowing myself. Because I was like, what can I remove from this mental equation?
I'm so glad you didn't say 6 weeks too, because that drives me up a wall. Because then you hit that 6-week marker and you're like, okay, I need to be normal now. I need everything's back to normal. And other people expect that of you. What has been 6 weeks since you had? And it doesn't happen for everybody.
No.
Very few people.
And that's probably why that postpartum depression occurs at 3 to 5 months again. Because it's like, you're like, I should be normal. You're like, no, not even close.
And I joke about it, but
still doing this.
But you're not going to be normal again at all, because the next thing comes down the pike, and you've got another. When we want to hold on to how it was, we want to hold on to
like
this
weight gain during pregnancy. Like this pregnancy, I was just like, I knew it as soon as it started. I was like, I'm just going to gain a ton of weight because of all the scenarios that are going on in our life. I didn't even think about like having pelvic problems and not being able to be active for that reason. But I was just like, and then you're just like, well, but then I'll have the baby and then we'll start walking, like it helps you kind of just like live in a cycle rather than live in this continuous linear progression that you have to somehow get back to this golden period.
Right. I don't know. I mean, I don't look the same as I did when I was 12, when I was 16, when I was 16, when I was 22.
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh my goodness.
As you said, sharing those kind of stories is so important, because I think oftentimes even in really good Catholic media, for instance, like we end up just kind of over spiritualizing the faith and just talking about the stuff in theory. And it all sounds great. Like we had a lot of theology of the body training before we got married, and the marriage course and JP2, and it was all sounded great, but that doesn't itself, it's good. It's so good, but it doesn't itself prepare you for then actually getting married and actually dealing with issues of sexuality and baby time and postpartum and all this stuff. And again, if no one's ever talked about it, and your parents didn't talk about it, and your friends don't talk about it, then you're just like, you really are, like you feel so alone and all that kind of stuff.
The church can't standardize that stuff. That's not something
It can't
that
be.
the church
There's
can.
you can't make a course out of that. It just
to
needs
bring
community.
Back, like, this multi-generational understanding and living and living in reality.
I do that all the time with, especially first-time moms or moms having their first natural delivery. I'm not like brutal and trying to scare anybody, but I refuse to call it waves, contractions. I refuse to call it waves. I'm like, no, it's pain. Yeah. That's the word we use to describe that kind of thing. So I'm just going to say it. It's pain.
Well, even now with the baby, like daily flipping between like OP and whatever else you call it, like it hurts, like I can tell that the contractions that come are contractions that are not happy with where she is. They're like trying to do something like prodromal labor or whatever, where you're just like, she's not in the right position, I can tell. And then my body's like in pain. Trying to get her back.
But in some circles, that's like that word is a no-no, and I'm like, oh, no, but that's like that's the word we use, and
I was thinking another thing too is that so this idea of sharing stories and having this stuff out there, you'd think that social media would be a big boon to that, and probably it may be helpful in some ways, but it also exposes you to lots of people who are either really disconnected from reality, it's all pie in the sky, very theoretical, very idealized, or the other extreme of very despairing and complaining and who've really had bad experiences, and they're processing them, but they're processing them publicly, and maybe it's not the person who's maybe looking back after they've sort of healed, it's somebody who's still struggling with it. And so it doesn't necessarily, just by having all the voices there, it doesn't itself replace the community
the
helping people work
that
through
we're going to go through in the next episode that came from people. Like, it was just very clear that people were not taken care of the way they ought to have been taken care of. I mean, really, that's what I was thinking it was coming down to, was just like, you need to talk about the NICU stay. You need to talk about what if things don't go the way you want, which is true. They may not. This may not go the way I want it to, or like, you need to talk about all the things that can go wrong with breastfeeding and all the things. And you're just like, I'm looking at so many wounded people who are not taken care of the way they should have been taken care of. And I mean, like, I really think that is the key, is that we should know what our body expects, and we should hope and plan for giving the body what it needs, and that, and working on, I mean, like, you're just walking around with wounds, or fears or triggers or, things like that. And desperately saying, like, if enough people said that they simply couldn't nurse their baby, which happens, but like, if enough people say it and enough people like don't just expect you to breastfeed, then I'll be better. But that's not the reality. Right. The reality is, like, you may have not received good care, and you may still not be receiving good care. And you may actually be rejecting good care at this moment, because there is this like horrific wound that you didn't, you know what I mean? Like,
right.
And so it's like, I'm just looking at all these like comments and questions, and I'm like, oh my God, we're all so wounded.
And there's nothing wrong with being prepared for that. You need to have the number of the hospital if you're planning a home birth. Yeah. You need to have the lactation consultant, the number, like the dentist, like you said, to have those resources available or know where to get those resources. Yeah. But that doesn't, and it's hard too when somebody has a bad experience. Misery loves company, and it doesn't mean that's everybody's experience though. And we should be working to make those experiences better, and by sharing truthfully like this, and that does help.
Yeah. We were talking recently about the difference between, like, what's the difference between complaining, which we all fall into that sometimes, when we're sort of processing out loud, but we don't want input, like we're just trying, like, misery invites, versus like I actually want to share this with you, and I do want input, and I do want like there's a line there, because one wants to just sort of sit with the misery and not be healed from it, and the other is sort of open to healing. And that's the thing that sometimes happens in social media, where it always stays on the level of sort of this continual, just sort of like leaning into this wound, but not in a way that's open to healing. And it's like in the context of friendships and relationships and family, like that's where you can open it up, but also invite, prayer and healing and stuff. And that needs to happen. But it doesn't always happen, it seems like. Yeah. We probably should wrap it up, but I mean, any other thoughts or advice or anything particular that you want to make sure that you get shared with people who are listening or watching?
Not in particular. Oh. No, this was great. Yeah, this was good stuff.
We're going to make this a 2-part episode, so if you're watching, we've had Lisa on this hour, Lisa Baldwin, my midwife, mom of 16, and we're talking mainly about elevating the postpartum period, and then we've got an episode that we're going to do about like how we as a couple do postpartum and prepare for postpartum, and like a lot of our practicals and things like that. So
good. That's exciting.
Well, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me. It was great. It was great. I could talk about this all day.
Me too. As you can tell.
Thanks for your good work as a mom and as a midwife. Again, this is, as we talked about, like, this is this is the pinnacle of society. This is what society is for. It's for family. It's for new life. And so, the small ways that we begin to normalize that, bring that back into people's consciousness, into our routines and mores and manners, this is something sacred and awesome and holy, and we need to everybody get together to make this happen. So thank you for doing that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you for joining us for this episode of Elevate Ordinary. Again, if you want more information about the show, check out the archives and stuff, go to elevateordinary.com. And there's also information about how to support the show there. You can download the Awaken app, where you can get episodes of this show and other great shows from Awaken Catholic, as well as all kinds of other cool stuff. Dang, I just saw that preview of the app there. And I hadn't seen that before. It looks like I need to open the app and check it out. It looks like it's been updated.
We open the app every day and interact on it.
Not this day. I haven't done it yet. So.
I'm sorry. I'm not good with my phone.
So check it out. It'll be cool. Again, thank you for joining us for this episode of Elevate Ordinary. God bless you. Talk to you again next week.